So, I'm sure you're used to seeing videos and live streams of emulated games on the internet. You see Mega Man looking this sharp and you don't really think twice about it. Of course it's emulated, right? Most NES systems output composite video at best, and in some cases, for those that remember it, RF only. Nintendo's Virtual Console is pretty nice looking though. In fact, I thought for the longest time it was the be-all, end-all way of playing classic games from an official source. Well, check this out. What you're seeing here is actually running on real NES hardware. In this episode, we're going to be talking about getting the best picture out of your retro consoles with a format called RGB, and the journey of discovery we took to find it.
Back before we started the My Life in Gaming channel, Coury and I were working together to research how to get the best picture from our retro game consoles, and how to improve the quality of our streams and recordings. Even though I've always been a video guy, I started to feel like there was this insurmountable wall of technical information, but we slowly broke through over time and are really pleased with where we've ended up. But everyone's starting point is different, so let's quickly go over the basic issues that retro gamers face with today's display technology. If you've ever taken the red, white, and yellow RCA cables that came packaged with your Super Nintendo and heck, pretty much every console up through the PS3 and Wii, and plugged them into your HDTV, you'll be familiar with this dirty, smeary image. It's called composite video, which means all of the picture information is being pumped through a single cable, the yellow one. The game's still fun, but there's that nagging feeling that it'd sure be nice if it looked better. Now, if you've never tried S-Video, it's pretty great. The connector itself is an awful design, but unlike composite video, it carries the image over 2 wires internally, which gets rid of most of the color distortion and crawly edges. And many older consoles support it. It's a big first step toward improving the picture quality, but stay with us here, you can do so much more than that. If you know anything about video resolutions and interlaced versus progressive images, you'll probably know that standard definition is often referred to as 480i. But actually, up until the Dreamcast, almost all console games output at an even lower resolution, 240p. This is why games are so famous for that chunky pixel look, but HDTVs have to process the image in order to fill that huge expanse of pixels. And frankly, TV manufacturers just don't really care how accurately vintage game images are processed, with the built-in scalers and deinterlacers for standard definition giving preference to improving 480i video content at the expense of 240p content. And some TVs can't even process 240p at all. Not to mention, depending on the TV and its processing modes, all of this can and will introduce varying degrees of input lag. So with every advance that television technology makes, modern displays continue to become more and more unfriendly toward retro consoles. To make matters worse, better quality analog connections have been getting phased out of newer TV models and audio receivers, and in the case of S-Video, it's been gone for years. This means that fans of retro games are slowly getting left behind, especially those of us who enjoy playing physical copies of games on original hardware. It's a pretty crappy situation, but if you know what to look for, there's some excellent solutions out there that can make your consoles look even better than they did back in the day.
So we started throwing around ideas to put together the ultimate technical setup for retro gaming. After some light searching, I discovered that external scalers do exist. I first bought this piece of equipment. It didn't cost a lot of money, and it scales 240p to 1080p with ease, but it certainly doesn't look that great, and there was some input lag too. Sometime later, we stumbled upon a website that had us drooling over this little box called the XRGB Mini, better known as the Framemeister. Now, this amazing piece of hardware is sold in Japan by a company called Micomsoft. Reports of virtually no lag and pristine picture quality, scaled to HD over HDMI, had us both wishing we had the guts to spend $350 without first seeing how it performs in person. But the Framemeister seemed like a smart choice for our setups, and I decided to take the plunge. Needless to say, I was immediately blown away. It wasn't long before Try followed after hearing my glowing praise. It's obvious that the Framemeister is designed by engineers who know exactly what retro pixels should look like. Unlike the scaler built into your TV, the Framemeister actually recognizes 240p signals as progressive rather than interlaced. It has an insane amount of tweaks to get your games looking better than you ever knew they could, and it spits it back out to your TV in HD, over HDMI, with so little lag that people won't even know it's there. I mean, check it out, it even has an option to introduce scan lines to the image to make it look like a CRT television.
Let's take a closer look at the Framemeister's inputs. On the front, you've got the familiar red, white, and yellow RCA composite inputs with S-Video right next to it. On the back side, you're probably unfamiliar with the D-terminal input. This is a connector common in Japan, but for our purposes, we use a component video adapter in this port for systems that support component video like the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2, which look great with a few settings tweaks. Now, maybe you'll be happy with simply plugging in S-Video cables and calling it a day. I love S-Video, so at first that's kind of what I thought I was going to be doing. Either way, you're going to be getting some super sharp pixels and a really crisp image compared to what you could ever hope to see with your TV's built-in scaler. But let's take a look around the front again. The Framemeister can accept a signal called RGB. This is an incredibly high level of video quality that most people don't even know their retro consoles can produce. Many systems have it already built in, and it can be implemented into others with modding. RGB gives you an image that makes PS1 games look even better than they do on PS3. And Super Nintendo games through RGB are actually slightly sharper than they are on Wii U. Believe it or not, almost every retro console is capable of producing an image that is superior to the emulated methods that the virtual console type services provide on modern hardware.
RGB carries the red, green, and blue parts of the image separately. You might think this sounds close to what a component cable does, and that's maybe half right. But don't mistake them for being the same type of signal. So what kind of cable do you use for RGB? Well, for our purposes, we're using SCART cables. Take a closer look. You can see that it has this funny looking 21-pin connector that if you live in North America, you've probably never seen. Sadly, almost no consumer electronics in North America ever had a SCART-style RGB interface, but it was very prominent throughout Europe. Now, if you're into the idea of having a CRT in your gaming setup, instead of an upscaler like the Framemeister, you can hunt down a SCART to component box if your TV supports component. Another option would be obtaining a production level monitor that's for sale off of, say, Craigslist or something, but the connectors for that are likely BNC instead of SCART. Even though SCART connections are uncommon in our part of the world, you might be surprised to learn that the North American versions of many consoles are already wired up inside to output RGB. Systems like the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Sega Saturn, PS1, and PS2 all have this readily available, if you have the correct cable to access it. There are some other considerations though, like the Dreamcast. You'll get the best picture with VGA, and for the PS2 you can get progressive scan on some games that use component cables instead of a SCART cable. By far the best source we've found for high quality SCART cables has been from an eBay seller who goes by Retro Console Accessories. We've also grabbed a few from a UK website called retrogamingcables.com.
It sounds dumb to admit it, but even though I'd had some interest in the Sega Genesis, adding another system to my setup that wasn't capable of anything better than composite video was a bit of a barrier for me. When I learned that I could get RGB out of the Genesis without any modifications, it didn't take long for me to decide to buy one, and I have no regrets. Not only did I finally get to play Contra Hardcore, but playing it with pixels so sharp they'll cut your eyes was well worth the wait. The Genesis might even have the sharpest presentation of any system that natively outputs RGB. Other systems may require some modification. I'm obviously a huge fan of the NES, but I was always bummed that there was nothing I could do to make it look any better. The Framemeister helps, but even it can't work miracles if the source video is no better than composite. What people used to do was take the picture processing unit, or PPU, out of a PlayChoice 10 arcade board and replace the NES PPU to get RGB. But the parts are rare and expensive, and because the PlayChoice 10 actually uses a different color palette than the NES, the results weren't necessarily that great, or so I've heard. Much more recently, a guy in Australia named Tim Worthington has developed a new board called the NES RGB, which costs about $90, way less than a PlayChoice 10 PPU. These sell out fast whenever he puts them up on his website, so you'll want to start paying attention if you want to grab one. I don't have any experience with soldering, so I hired a modder to install the NES RGB into my Model 2 Famicom. There were a few bumps along the road, but it was well worth it. I now play almost all of my NES games through an NES to Famicom cart converter, so I can play games from both North America and Japan on my modded system.
I was so impressed with Try's results that I went ahead and bought a Model 2 NES that had already been modded with the NES RGB board to replace my Composite modded NES 101 unit. As you can see here, the RF-only output on the back of my top loader has been replaced with an AV multi-out like you generally saw on a SNES, N64, and GameCube. The results are crazy. I'd always been a middle-of-the-road NES fan. I had a lot of games that I liked, but it was admittedly never much of a priority for me. Utilizing this mod absolutely changed my level of interest in the system. Seeing games look this amazing was definitely a game changer for me. You might have heard about the custom aluminum NES and Famicom system called the Analog NT. This unit uses real NES processing chips inside, and it supports RGB output via custom HDMI adapter. I'm sure it's a great option for some people, but it's $500. And it's probably more cost-effective to just start putting together all the pieces to an RGB mod for an NES or Famicom like Try did. Or just buy one pre-modded like I did.
Yeah, I was interested in it, but for me personally, it would kind of bother me to play on something that didn't look like an NES or a Famicom on the outside. I also got my N64 modded for RGB, which is a very simple and inexpensive mod. Normally it's only possible on relatively early N64 systems, but it's my understanding that French modders have much more recently developed a method for modding RGB into any N64. As you might expect, the results aren't exactly revelatory in the case of a console that primarily displays early 3D graphics at a low resolution. But the image is slightly sharper than S-Video, and textures do have a bit more contrast and depth.
Almost all footage that has been recorded for every episode of My Life in Gaming since the beginning has been captured on real consoles upscaled through the Framemeister. Check it out, here's a few more side-by-side comparisons in action.